Hello and welcome. My name is Justin Martinez. I'm with my studio, Fluent Guitar Music Lessons. I teach a variety of instruments, starting with guitar, ukulele, mandolin, bass, and piano. I wanted to record these series of core content for my members, whether you're a current student or a potential student just looking to get their feet wet. I want to make sure that we have the basic elements of making music on an instrument available and ready so that you can review these lessons anytime you want and kind of get a refresher and reminder if you need to. So today's lesson is going to be an introduction to basic open chords. Okay. Now, my goal again with these core courses and elements is to get you up and running and playing songs as quickly as possible, as comfortably as possible, without developing any bad habits. Okay, so other courses will talk about specific practice strategies and how to integrate and incorporate these lessons as best as you can and start practicing and again without bad habits. But today again we're going to do the chord element. That's our building blocks of playing most songs that we're going to want to do. Okay, so this is geared toward beginners, where we're going to use specifically open chord shapes, and we'll start with one shape and expand it out into three different chords actually. Okay, now again, that the point of sequencing these shapes is to make it as musical as possible from the beginning, and as well as pretty simple physically from the beginning, to help you just get playing immediately. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is try to see if I can share my screen here. Nope, I don't think so. Okay, good to know, actually. Hmm, interesting. All right, well, they don't let me share my screen, at least not that I think of. This is my first ever recording on YouTube here for a live stream and for classes here. Okay, so let's get started. The way I like to teach anyway is to introduce you to thinking like a musician. And that means that we have to have these ideas in our head and useful all the way to our fingers in a physical manifestation and physical way here. Okay. So basically, and we'll talk about this more in the practice strategies and habits class, but basically, what you want to do is throughout your day, get into the habit of imagining these patterns, these shapes, and the tactile feelings, physical feelings of playing these patterns and shapes, and just kind of throughout your day mentally imagine doing it and recall and remember what they look like and what they feel like. And if you can, what they sound like. A little harder, but also doable with some practice. Okay. With that in mind, there's no written material. I do include some written material in classes, of course, to help as reminders. But again, with the practices and strategies that we have, you often won't need the written materials unless you just need a quick refresher and can't quite remember all the specific details here. Okay. But since we're dealing with chords and songs, the patterns and the shapes become we use over and over again so that you get a lot of practice and repetition to integrate them into your mind. And again, with constantly getting into the habit of constantly imagining doing them, you will, in fact, you'll have them right in your fingers when you need them to. Okay, so first we need to introduce ourselves to the way we'll talk about the strings and the fingers and the frets. So I'm not going to go over all the parts of the guitar here, but the most important part of the guitar here is on the neck, and the front part we call the fretboard. These metal pieces here raised up, and we want you to feel those, are what we call the frets. Okay. Now, in another series, I'll talk about specific techniques. We'll get into the techniques here a little bit, but basically, we'll talk about how you want to put pressure on the strings and get a good sound here while we're doing the chords. So the first thing we need to know is that there's six strings, and we label them by numbers typically. Okay. And so we start here on the highest sounding string. We actually call this the top string because of the sound, not because of its location, but because of the sound. It's the highest sounding. So this is string number 1. And then we just go down this way. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. So those are our string numbers. The fret numbers are numbered the same way. We start with no fret, or what we call fret 0, or an open string. And then as we apply pressure to the fret here, I'm getting higher, so we number the frets accordingly. So I'm on fret 5, for example, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on. So we have a grid system. We have the string numbers intersecting with the fret numbers. Okay, so now you can take specific instruction on which frets and which strings to press. Of course, you also need to know which fingers to use to do that. And we also number our fingers on our fretting hand. So we have finger number 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay. Now, the basic technique and the idea that you need to in order to put pressure on the strings comes from this idea that if we are not pressing the strings down to create the sound all by ourselves, we have a huge help from the frets themselves. Okay. So the fret's job is to actually stop the string at that specific point on the string. And our job is to create the leverage on the string so that it does press down on the fret. So we don't want to press directly on the fret. We want to press as close to the fret as possible, even touching the fret, as long as we're not trying to put the pressure directly down on the fret. So I'm pressing the fret here, fret number 3, string number 1, right next to the fret. We don't need to press that hard, as it turns out, because the leverage idea. That also means that we got to be careful where we put our fingers in the fret. Now we can't always be right next to the fret, but we also don't want to be here. You can hear that buzzing. That's because the string's trying to be pressed against this fret here, but I'm way over here, so there's a lot of slack here. So I don't have enough leverage to press the string all the way against the fret. That's where you get a little buzzing and some weird tones, sometimes even dead tones. So you want to be on this side of the fret going up the neck here. Okay. All right. So with those few principles, the way we apply that pressure is not only position, but also by weight. Okay. So if you picked up your hand and just dropped it, okay, that's weight, gravity. Now, the way we do this is we put a finger on the string and we act like our hand's going to drop, but our fingertips hold us up onto the string. What this will do is it'll line up your knuckles, which our power comes from the big knuckles. It'll also keep your fingers nice and curved and powerful, as opposed to locking a joint out somewhere along the way, which we get if we're trying to press the string back. That's when we get that kind of locking, wobbling feeling here. So if we start with this hanging feeling, I could press it without any pressure, any squeezing pressure at all. Now, of course, we apply our thumb to help so that we're not fully having to use gravity, but it's a nice balancing act. So gravity is going to be always the first thing, hanging fingers, as I say, always the first thing to help us get into shape, to get our fingers playing into shape. It helps us avoid touching unwanted strings that we don't want to touch, and only keeping them on the strings that we want. It helps keep the pressure down on the strings the right way. It helps keep our fingers nice and mobile and fluid so that we can move more fluidly too. Okay. So weighted pressure, again, we'll talk about this in another series more specifically. But chords are a great way to realize this idea. Okay. So our first chord shape is going to be using our first 3 fingers, fingers 1, 2, and 3, and just our first 3 frets, frets 1, 2, and 3. Okay. Now we're going to start small. We're going to start with our fingers pretty close together. Keep this in mind. When you're playing a chord, you don't want any repeat fingers on the same string, right? We have a one finger on a different string somewhere. Okay. So our first finger is going to go to our first fret of the second string. So remember, this is our first string down here. We're going to go to our second string on the first fret. Remember, hang here. Okay. Then what you're going to do is you're going to take your second finger on the next string positionally up, the third string, on the second fret. So fret 1, fret 2, nice diagonal. Of course, we're going to continue that diagonal line with our third finger on the third fret of the fourth string. So the next string up again and diagonal over again. So this is a nice diagonal shape. Okay. And that's it. Now, the way I sequenced this was 1, 2, 3. However, you might actually have a little trouble with that, especially if you don't understand where to put your thumb yet or anything like that. So here's actually how we're going to do that. We're going to do it backwards. We're going to do it 3, 2, and 1. So start with your ring finger first. Again, hang from that finger. Notice then that's when you apply your thumb to support that ring finger. So that nice weight, you should feel nice looseness in your elbow here. Okay, and you're gonna have a nice weighted thing. Again, nice curved finger, space under here. Okay, and again, you get that by hanging. So you don't have to think about all these things as long as you hang. Apply a little pressure with your thumb to support that, then stretch backwards with your second finger and your first finger. And you'll notice, and let your hand maneuver and adjust a little bit here. And your thumb might want to go a little bit more toward your middle finger here as well, and see how that angle changed a little bit. It's totally fine in this position to have your fingers kind of angled more this way. It's very normal, in fact. Notice the space though between my fingers. Okay. Again, if you're hanging and you're stretching back with reaching back with those fingers, it will create that space for you instead of doing this, where we tend to do that if we go this way. Okay, so start here. That's the little secret to most chord shapes, is start with your furthest extended finger first, and then you will have a nice, easier way of getting into shape. So this is our first shape here, and we're gonna start, if you have a pick or just with your thumb for now, whatever is you're used to. You're gonna start and find that fourth string, so the same string that your ring finger's on, and that's where we're gonna strum down from. Okay, and that you just want to have a nice 4-string chord. Now this chord is, we're going to call an F chord for now. It's technically an F major 7 because of that open first string. You don't have to worry about why it's called that. Just know it's a modified F chord. It's a nice substitute for just F for most songs, especially with the other two chords that we're going to use. Okay, so that's your first shape. Again, you might have soreness on your fingertips. You might feel tension in your hand. You don't want to work through that too much. If you feel too much tension in your hand, make sure you're hanging a little more and release the squeezing pressure that you need. Okay, balance that out and then come back here. Okay, so F major 7 here. Okay. For our next two chords, we're actually going to continue. We're going to take the same fingering, the same frets, and just expand it across the different strings here. And I want you to realize what's going on here. What I call the core sound and the core shape of our three chords here is actually what happens with these two fingers. These two fingers are one string apart, so strings next to each other, one fret apart, fret 2, fret 3. Okay, so watch what happens when we go to our next chord. These two fingers simply move up, string 5, string 4. This finger stays put. So we transition from this chord to this chord by trying to move them together. Now I'll have another video specifically about transitions. Right now I just want to introduce you to the shapes, but there's a hint for you. Okay, so our second shape here, I'm on fret 3 still, fret 2, string 5, string 4, still fret 1, string 2 here. So now I have the open string in the middle, fret of string 3. And now my pick or my thumb is going to follow this finger. So I'm going to start my strum from the 5th string. We have a C major chord here. Okay, so F and C. You can hear how they actually sound very musical together already. This is why we're using them. Same shape, expanding them. Okay, finally we have our third chord. Again, you'll notice the pattern. We started here. We're moving these two together up as a shape, as a unit. We're going to do the same thing again. We're going to move them up again. 6th fret, 6th string, 3rd fret. 5th string, 2nd fret. So that's moved up now all the way to the lowest sounding string here. This time, however, I'm also going to move my first finger down to the 1st string, 1st fret here. So I've expanded, same shape, frets 1, 2, and 3 still. that we started with. However, they're fully expanded across all 6 strings. So these two stay together. This one's all the way to the first string. Of course, I'm going to start my strum from the 6th string. And we have what's called a G7 chord. Again, don't worry about the 7. Just know that it's a slightly different sound than like a G major chord. Okay. And that's it. So I want you to get used to try each chord by itself right now. Remember, set up with your ring finger first, then your middle finger. Get your weight and your thumb applied, then move your first finger over. You'll notice that'll be a lot easier to accomplish the shape. Okay. Your goal is to try to hear each string, but don't worry too much if you're deadening some strings occasionally. That will come with time and with a little more practice and finesse as you get used to putting your fingers and your hands on this instrument here. So your goal is to just really get used and acquainted to thinking about the string numbers, the fret numbering, and the finger numbers to apply the knowledge and the shapes. Okay. And then, of course, just start getting used to the shapes. How does it feel? And what does it look like? Not from your point of view, but what does it look like for someone else to play it? Can you picture that in your mind? Okay. And it's a nice diagonal shape with all 3. Just think close together, adjacent strings, slightly spread apart with these 2 moving apart, and then finally fully spread apart with these 2 still together, but then that one fully apart. Okay. And we have the introduction to our 3 first chords that will allow us to unlock a lot of music just with these 3 simple chords.